Okay, so Ghosts of Solid Air is a public engagement project which takes the form of a site-specific, immersive, augmented reality experience for smartphones, which aims to engage diverse audiences to understand and participate in discussions around contested statues in London and beyond. And the aim of this talk is to introduce the project and its background, to discuss some of the implications of its findings for critical heritage studies and the heritage and museum sector more broadly, particularly in the context of current government policy in England and elsewhere to retain and explain contested monuments and statues. I'm going to begin with a picture of this character here. So this collaborative project has a long history and many people have been involved in its production. The project was originally developed as part of Colin Sterling's Arts and Humanities Research Council funded research fellowship titled New Trajectories in Curatorial Experience Design, which was based here in the Institute of Archaeology, and he's now Assistant Professor of Memory and Museums at the University of Amsterdam and somebody with whom I collaborate closely on various other projects, including reimagining museums for climate action. So working closely with public and private organisations in the broad field of museums and heritage, that project sought to understand how curators and other heritage professionals might engage with innovative methods of experience design to create new models of audience engagement, including truly collaborative forms of co-curation. The project set out to document and analyse current working practices within this field to explore how new technologies are impacting on the production of heritage experiences, and to understand how such technologies might contribute to different forms of co-production, knowledge exchange, and skill development. The methodology for this project was based around interviews, workshops, and collaborative product development with key partners. And a core line of inquiry which emerged for Colin during the course of that project was to what extent might new and emerging approaches to immersive and experiential design contribute to critical heritage thinking and practice. While museums and heritage sites have been quick to embrace the immersive turn to enhance audience engagement and promote new revenue streams, the broader critical potential of virtual reality, augmented reality, and related fields has only recently begun to receive scholarly attention within the field of heritage studies. And critical here refers to a number of intersecting concerns, including but not limited to a critique of the narrative and histories on which heritage is built, a critique of the institutions, agencies, policies and agendas through which heritage operates, a critique of exhibitions, sites, objects and interpretive schemes that mediate engagements with the past and the present, and crucially a critique of the larger issues that bear upon and extend outwards from heritage. Broader sort of issues to do with politics and nationalism and all those sorts of things that we know have heritage is implicated in. So the design and production of immersive experiences may help to explore these questions in a range of different ways. This is not to say that such experiences have a particular efficacy in relation to critical heritage thinking and practice, but rather that they should be seen as vital nodal points in a broader heritage complex, as sites of contestation, consumption, innovation, and transformation where different modalities of experience might shape new heritage imaginaries. And this is a point I want to return to at the conclusion of the talk. So the final stage of Colin's project sought to explore these questions through embedded research on a new immersive experience, which was originally to be developed in partnership with the National Trust. Unfortunately, the pandemic meant that this strand of the project had to be cancelled at quite late notice. And in lieu of this, in July 2020, immersive design specialists Anagram were commissioned to develop a proof of concept immersive experience responding to a current issue in heritage and society. And this ended up being a very fortuitous turn in the project, out of which this augmented reality experience, Ghost of Solid Air, which I'm about to discuss, emerged. So Anagram are a multi-award-winning female-led creative company specialising in interactive storytelling and immersive experience design. Their work typically combines expertly crafted experiential storytelling that blends fiction and documentary with rigorous research. And they have a unique and playful approach to participatory storytelling that prioritises inclusive engagement and deep thinking. And they've won loads of awards, some of which are up here on the screen in front of you. So the proof of concept stage of the project was developed by Anagram in close collaboration with a group of young people who identify as young people of colour from London, aged 18 to 28. And this co-creators group has been central to the project and its themes as it's developed throughout all its phases. The project was initiated in the summer of 2020 in the wake of global protests over the murder of George Floyd in the United States, during which statues and monuments across the world became a focus for debate over whose histories and heritages are recognised, celebrated and valorised in the public sphere and whose are not. In the UK, these issues were exemplified by the spontaneous toppling of the statue of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol, and discussions in the media and elsewhere that emerged in response to this, and various other discussions around other particular statues in other parts of the country. So this co-creators group was assembled by the producer of the project in its early stages, Amaya Dent, and coordinated by Sarah Bono Malek. And the members of the group are Jonas Jean-Baptiste, Larice McIntosh Cargill, Kashima Nurse, Maya Nurse, Carolyn Francis, and Hannah Daisy. And the process involved 10 initial research and creative workshops and site visits, focusing particularly in an area in and around Trafalgar Square in central London, as well as creative check-ins throughout the process of developing the piece. And in developing the proof of concept, the co-creators group and the broader project development team interviewed a range of heritage practitioners from a number of different institutions, including Historic England, Imperial War Museum, Bishopsgate Institute, East End Women's Museum, Museum of London, Greater London Authority and City of London, as well as other individuals involved in public debates around contested monuments during 2020. And the idea, you can see from here some of the outputs of some of these workshops that were run at the time. So the idea emerged during these workshops to focus not on the stories of the monuments themselves, which would be one kind of obvious approach to kind of tell more stories about the individuals and the things that they did, good or bad, but to deploy the creative device of ghosts to trouble and haunt the monuments that were under discussion. Saha explains, quote, "Working with the co-creators group helped us to better understand the complexities faced by black people today and how they feel about the inaccurate history being taught by the British education system and through the memorialisation of these statues. During the research phase of the project, I took the team on a socially distanced statues tour where we got up close to the towering statues to discuss them. We talked about the historical context, political prowess, wealth and atrocities that had been committed, as well as discovering why these statues were being commemorated in the first place. Many statues in the 19th century were erected to honour the contributions made by individuals and groups of men to the British Empire. They were part of an honour system which was used to instil a sense of pride in empire and were often a means of keeping the support of elites. One of our main points of discussion surrounded the idea of having these statues removed and replaced. However, we came to the conclusion that the often troublesome history of such statues had to be seen and acknowledged, not erased. From here, we talked through our augmented reality app in development and wanted the chosen statues to be surrounded by ghosts sharing their narratives and giving their opinions of the statue itself. So the proof of concept was an interactive story designed to be explored on location in central London, running between Trafalgar Square and Parliament Squares, engaging a number of historical and contemporary characters, both real and fictional. The idea was that wearing headphones, you open the app on your smartphone, standing somewhere in Trafalgar Square, you hear voices speaking in unison, swirling around your head with meticulously crafted sound design. These are the voices at the gate, and they persuade you to speak up. Bit by bit, as you softly murmur into your phone, the ghost world is revealed, a strange world of pink sky, drifting mist and indistinct figures. As you explore, you meet a host of characters from across time who are radicalised through personal experience and forced into disobedient action. So with the proof of concept in hand, Colin and I applied for Arts and Humanities Research Council follow-on funding for impact and engagement to develop the app itself. The project has also received additional funding from UCL Innovation and Enterprise and the UCL Centre for Critical Heritage Studies. And the project was developed over 2022 and the first part of 2023 with a view to launching it as part of the BFI London Film Festival expanded programme coinciding with Black History Month in the UK in October 2023. So there's lots of things I could say about this, but I wanted to say something about the sort of aesthetic of the piece and the process of developing the piece itself, and then I'm going to play a couple of video clips to give you a sort of flavour of the experience of what it's like. It's very hard to actually talk about a kind of site-specific immersive experience without being able to experience yourself, but I hope to sort of give you a sense of it. So, and I'm going to quote fairly extensively from Amy Rose, who was the producer of this piece, talking about some of the process. So she says, working with augmented reality on the limited small screen of a mobile phone is a challenge both technically and artistically, and computer game imagery that bears very little relation to the texture of the real world is ubiquitous in this space, as demonstrated famously by something like Pokemon Go. We were looking for a way to do something different, to create a ghost world that felt evocative and rich and rooted in the real world itself rather than parachuted in from a computer game. So we built a team drawn from across disciplines who could bring something original to the table. Mireille Fauchon, with her background in illustration and archives, worked closely with Will Young, who's worked with interactive media and 3D visuals for over 15 years. The pair spent time physically working together, experimenting with the possibilities of both analog sets of tools and approaches to making. This allowed them to understand how to synthesize their methods to capture the feelings, texture, and tangibility desired and to translate them into augmented reality. Mireille approached the project from her own background. She began with building collages using archival imagery, visiting the sites, recording the location through taking rubbings of the various textures, architectural elements, street furniture, pavements, manhole covers, etc. Will then worked with Mireille to translate some of this into an appropriate form for Unity, which is the 3D game engine that augmented reality projects are built in. The intention was to create a sense of bodies and forms pressing through an invisible membrane, appearing out of the mist and displacing the air in which you stand and then melting away again. These forms could be made in complex contemporary software, but the resulting imagery is very perfect, with smooth bodies that feel distant from something with the rough rub of the human. So instead, Mireille made small models of human figures by hand. You can see one of these here. This form was 3D scanned and then rigged with movements captured from a dancer called Tara Silverthorne in Camera, a motion capture studio at the University of Bath. Again, with the movement, there's vast libraries on the internet which have thousands of movements from perfect kung fu kicks to hundreds of different walking cycles. But we used these movements while developing the ghosts, and as soon as the forms were rigged with movement from a real person, with all the hesitation, rapidity and mistakes of real life, the capacity of the ghostly form to communicate emotion was transformed. So this is what the app looks like on your smartphone if you're looking at it standing in Trafalgar Square. And I'm going to hopefully play a video now, which is, the first video is the video that we produced for the launch for the BFI London Film Festival. And the second video we produced at the same time, but it gives you more of a sort of sense of what it sounds like and what it feels like to be experiencing this app on location. Part of the interaction between the viewer and the app is in the act of speaking aloud into the phone's microphone. And Amy Rose goes on to say, the action in ghosts is to speak. You reveal ghosts by speaking aloud. The sensation of speaking words aloud in public space is a way of creating a dynamic between yourself and the ghost world where your voice or your attention matters. For a piece that is essentially exploring what it means and what it takes to speak up, this is crucial. And while most of the time you're repeating words that are dictated to you, there's a moment when you are asked a simple question and your words themselves appear integrated into the bodies of the ghost world in front of you. So the story, very briefly, takes place in 3 acts, and in each location, in addition to the ghosts who speak to you to tell you where to walk and what to say and how to experience the ghost world, you're introduced to a series of characters, each of whom has spoken up for a particular issue in the face of authority. So in Trafalgar Square, you're met by author and abolitionist Oloda Aquino. Born in 1745, he was sold into slavery but was eventually able to purchase his freedom in 1766, and in 1789 he published his autobiography. And this is one of the earliest known examples of writing by an African writer published in the United Kingdom, detailing his early life and his many adventures. And this became a kind of crucial counter-narrative to commonly held and prejudiced English beliefs about African people and slaves and their lives, and became a bestseller and an important tool for the abolitionist movement. The next act is in Horse Guards Parade, and you meet Udham Singh, an Indian revolutionary from the Punjab, who, after returning from fighting for the British in World War I, witnessed the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar in 1919. During the massacre, British troops fired indiscriminately on a crowd of thousands in the name of maintaining law and order. Hundreds were murdered and many more injured. Singh became involved in revolutionary politics against colonial rule. He moved to England, where he eventually assassinated Michael O'Dwyer, the lieutenant governor at the time of the massacre in Amritsar. And he was hanged in Pentonville prison after making a speech at his trial, which we draw on in the piece, which was censored by the judge. And in fact, it wasn't released to the public until 1996, after this sort of long period of campaigning by the Indian Workers' Association of Great Britain for the text of this speech to be made public. And then you also meet Josie McGowan, first Women's Council member to be killed during the Irish Revolution. At a protest against British rule, she was beaten up by a member of the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and she died a few days later on the 29th of September 1918. Her death certificate stated that she died of pneumonia, but her family and community maintained that her death was a result of the beating at the protest. And at the end, in Act 3 in Parliament Square, you meet a series of 4 contemporary activists who speak about their contemporary activism and how they got into it and why it counts to them. So Navern Cruz, who became an activist after he was wrongfully detained in his garden by a swarm of policemen who claimed he'd been seen carrying a knife, even though he hadn't left his house that day. He just went out to get the newspaper or something, or to check his mailbox, I think. So with the support of Bat Murphy solicitors, who were also involved in advising on aspects of the project, and they're a group of solicitors that support civil claims, people that have been wrongfully arrested or accused. He successfully sued the police and won his case. Dan Glass is an AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, healthcare and human rights activist, performer, presenter and writer. Dan has been recognised as Activist of the Year with the Sexual Freedom Awards and was announced a BBC Greater Londoner for founding Queer Tours of London: A Mince Through Time. Edward Defan was a survivor of the Grenfell Tower fire, and before the fire was co-author of the Grenfell Action blog, documenting how residents on the Lancaster West estate were being treated. He joined Grenfell United, a campaign group set up by survivors and bereaved families, to campaign for justice and change to ensure a fire like Grenfell can never happen again. The group has led campaigns to make homes across the country safer and to put more power in the hands of social housing residents. And finally, Andrea Mordaunt, who was also a member of ACT UP in the 1980s, and has been a long-time political activist, both grassroots and at the UN, where she lobbied to decriminalise drug use in order to prevent HIV spreading amongst injection drug users and other vulnerable citizens. She continues her activism with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. And all 4 activists participated in one of the events that we ran during the time of the BFI London Film Festival programme this year, which was really great, actually. So the project launched in October as part of the London Film Festival Expanded programme, which is the part of the programme for augmented reality and virtual reality experiences in film. And the team participated in a number of events to promote the app during this time, some of these in conjunction with We Are Parable, who worked to promote Black British film. In the weeks immediately before the launch, so we had some trouble. An unannounced update to part of the software in iOS, on which the version of the app for iPhones basically relied to run, broke, limiting its availability during the festival to phones running Android. And this was obviously extremely unfortunate timing, but we also arranged a number of times when it was possible to borrow phones. So we stood in Trafalgar Square lending phones out for people to be able to do the experience if people weren't able to do it on their own phones, which was quite a nice thing because it meant we could talk to people about, what their expectations were at the beginning and also what they thought at the end. So this does raise questions about the sustainability of such initiatives if they're made available for free, as we did with Ghosts of Solid Air, and if they're not associated with a particular sponsor or institution to promote them. And we're currently in conversation with the ICA and a couple of other institutions about whether they might take on the app to promote it. And I mean, I was a bit naive about this at the beginning, because I sort of thought if we made this thing for everyone to use on their smartphones, this would be very democratic and everyone could kind of do it themselves. And we wanted it to be independent and not necessarily affiliated with any institution, which would allow us to say the things we wanted to say. But yeah, I mean, it does raise issues about the ongoing maintenance and the cost of maintaining things. And obviously it was very expensive to make, and we would like people to be able to continue to use it. So there are some issues that we need to resolve as we're moving forward. Sorry, and I got a bit caught up, but these are some pictures from some of the events that we ran during the film festival. Some of the creators on your right. We ran some nice events. So we got Kojo Koram from Birkbeck spoke at one of our events. And this is the event where we had some of the activists speaking. We had some very nice coverage in Time Out, which was good. And obviously this is, at the time, you know, during being part of the film festival, meant there was a lot of attention on the app and a lot of interest. But yeah, thinking about how we kind of maintain it into the future is another part of what we need to think about. And we've also been working as part of one of the strands of work that we're doing in the Black Atlantic Network. We're working with educators on decolonial initiatives within secondary schools in particular. And so one of the things we're looking at doing is developing some educational resources around the app, so that it can be used in schools or made available as a resource for school teachers, which is another thing that will give it another life. But sort of to round up and kind of discuss and conclude, as Gary Young has argued, statues don't just give a misleading idea about particular people or particular historical events. They also skew how we understand history itself. When you put up a statue to honour a historical moment, you reduce that moment to a single person. This work has been undertaken against the backdrop of an increasingly public debate on the role of the past in contemporary life, and what have been framed as a series of contemporary culture wars. In January 2021, Robert Jenrick, remember him from last week, who was then Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, announced a new law to make it harder for councils and other public bodies to remove contested monuments. In Jenrick's words, the government's new approach emphasised the need for monuments to be, quote, explained and contextualised, not taken and hidden away, close quote. This follows an earlier statement by Oliver Dowden, then Secretary of State for DCMS, Digital Culture, Media and Sport, setting out the government's position on contested heritage. Rather than erasing these objects, we should seek to contextualise or reinterpret them in a way that enables the public to learn about them in their entirety, however challenging this may be, close quote. These have been followed by detailed guidelines which were issued by DCMS in October this year, actually coinciding very much with the launch. So the guidance applies to any statue or monument accessible to the public in the local community that faces calls for its removal or relocation on the grounds of changing views about the people or events it commemorates. Decision makers may include owners, trustees or board members with care and custodial responsibility for the asset in question. And the starting point for the guidance is for custodians to comply with the government policy to retain and explain, and to keep assets in situ, but to complement them as necessary with a comprehensive, quote, explanation, which provides the whole story of the person or event depicted so that a fuller understanding of the historical context can be known, understood, and debated. So what such declarations obviously leave open is the complexity of this process of reinterpretation. How are these statues to be interpreted more comprehensively and explained, and how and where can individuals and groups debate the meaning and relevance of monuments within the public sphere? How can the interpretation of statues and memorials move beyond static signage to embrace an ever-changing field of interpretive encounters? What does it mean to turn public forms of interpretation into orchestrated experiences? And what narratives and histories should be prioritised through this approach, and who gets to play a role in these processes? This is obviously not just about wrestling with contested legacies and historical injustices. It's about the structural inequalities that continue to shape heritage as a field of practice and as a space of knowledge production. We think projects like this one, which are intentionally open and designed to raise questions and invite further critical reflection, provide one means by which this might be done within an environment in which it's now been made unlawful to remove monuments which are deemed to be offensive, even where that might be the most desired option and there's wide support for doing so. And I want to make clear here that I absolutely do support the active removal of monuments to slave traders and other historical figures as part of a reassessment of their significance where this is supported. Historian and broadcaster David Olusoga's statement on the new Retain and Explain guidelines is very instructive here. He notes, "The problem I have with this guidance is not so much the guidance itself, although it is a very central government approach, rather than allowing local decision making. The problem I have is that it regurgitates two falsehoods. The first is that the problem with statues is modern attitudes changing, which implies that people approved of the statues and these men in their own lifetimes, and this is often demonstrably untrue. The other is that these statues tell us our history. The advice says that removing heritage will limit our understanding of difficult parts of our history. Which statue can we point to that tells us about a difficult part of our history? They can't teach us history. They're always silent about victims, and they're put up by tiny members of a male elite to celebrate the lives of other members of a tiny male elite." So there's already clear momentum for change in relation to statues commemorating those involved in the slave trade, with many memorials being removed or renamed since the protests of the summer of 2020. And while this approach may not be possible or even desirable for all contested monuments, the need to constantly reassess and reinterpret such material legacies continues to be an important task for heritage practitioners and wider society alike. The final stage of our project aims to explore these questions in conversation with heritage practitioners and policymakers, using Ghosts of Solid Air as a case study in the critical potential of new interpretive experiences for the heritage and museum sector. To this end, Anagram are currently completing an evaluation of the project, drawing on interviews with co-creators and users, and we plan to run a series of workshops with relevant heritage museum organisations exploring these issues further in the coming year. So, just to conclude, while debates over public commemoration and memorialisation are nothing new, recent events in the UK and around the world have brought into sharp focus the need for more nuanced and pluralistic stories to be told in and through the historic built environment. This is not just a question of what histories are represented in public space and how, but also who gets to play a role in telling these stories and what agency they have to shape new narratives around them. Retain and Explain as a policy might in fact hamper these efforts, or indeed it might create opportunities for the kind of work that we're presenting here. As Nancy Fraser argued in her seminal paper Rethinking Recognition, quote, "Culture is a legitimate, even necessary terrain of struggle and a site of injustice in its own right." For Fraser, confronting these injustices means, quote, "changing the values that regulate interaction, entrenching new value patterns that will promote parity of participation in social life," close quote. Participatory parity, in this context, seeks to avoid both authoritarianism and separatist identity politics, aiming instead for a form of democratised transcultural interaction. Heritage and memory are key focal points for such interaction, but they're also terrains of struggle and all too often sites of ongoing injustices. How to foster participatory parity therefore remains an urgent question for the field, one that reaches far beyond academic discourse to impact on issues of access, inclusion, and the politics of representation in public space. We see our project as making a small but significant contribution to these questions by showing how augmented, blended, and virtual reality experiences and storytelling can complicate and enhance current conversations around contested monuments and provide rich experiences which invite new and existing audiences for heritage to think critically about the historic environment and the values it embodies in contemporary society. And I'll end it there, but I'm going to end it with the cast and credits of this piece, which you'll see has involved lots and lots of people working on it, all of whom have put a lot of their own time and energy into it. Thank you.